The Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. It is the second half already right here on the Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker. I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Mr. Johnny Whistles. Want to thank each and every one of you for continuing to tune in not only to this show, but all the shows right here on your favourite network, truthfrequencyradio.com. And it's amazing because we're going to be joined by a fellow host on the network, an anti-war activist, former CIA asset, author, amazingly brilliant human being, Susan Lindauer. Welcome back at long last to the Kev Baker Show.
Hey, I am so honored. I love the Kev Baker Show. You guys are so much fun. My show airs on Saturdays and Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, like New York time, and gosh, I guess the time zone in Europe would be about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, so, Susan, I'll let you into a little secret because in Glasgow, because I work the weekends, I'm in the office, and you are a bit of my guilty pleasure. At the weekend, you come on at lunchtime, and some of the guests that you're able to bring on, it's very much like we're able to call on Alex in Ukraine. You like to go to people on the ground. And I really appreciate hearing from these real people in these real situations. So I have to give your show a big shout out. And just yet another arrow in the weaponry of TFR, because there's so much to be learnt from you, Susan. Are you there? There you are.
I'm right here. My little dog is barking in the background saying thank you too.
See? Now, I've got you on tonight because there's so much going on in the world. And I was telling the audience before the break that you got into a lot of bother back after 9/11 because you were warning...
Well, you know, I got to tell you something. I got to tell everybody this because I did. I was the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act. And I'm going to share something on your radio show that I have not told other people. But at the time that I got into trouble, I had been insisting on catastrophic consequences of the Iraq War. And one of the things that I had been pushing very hard was that the war would explode into a second phase of war, a region. I'm not making this up after the fact. This is what I said in 2002, 2003. I said that there would have to be a second war to throw out the puppet government installed by the U.S. in Iraq, and that the puppet would have to be overthrown because the natural Iraqi people, the indigenous Iraqi people, as opposed to the exiles and the neocons and the Zionists and all the French and the British and all the people outside who wanted to go after Iraq, that the real Iraqi people would consider it traitorous to help the United States, and any government that would be installed by the United States would have no legitimacy, it would have to be overthrown, and that would propel into a region-wide war that would take over Syria and Jordan and Turkey and, you know, the whole region. It would swallow everything. And then the war would come into Europe because people fleeing the war would come to Europe and they would carry the distress and the tension, and it would spill into Europe. And I didn't really talk about the refugees so much as the fact that the outcome would be a war in Europe, which I think this is going to be.
I mean,
I think we're now moving to a stage where we have gone from from having a long fallow period of, just tension, deep, painful, miserable, and we got to use the word blowback. I'm sorry. I know everybody in Paris is really upset about the terrorism. I'm upset about the terrorism too. I do not regard it as a false flag. I think it's real. I think these are really angry, bitterly furious, disappointed, impotent people. And they are frustrated because they were castrated men We humiliated them. We degraded them. The United States did. We emasculated. That's a better word than castrated. Sorry, guys. Sorry. They emasculated them. And this is how they're taking back their power. So I don't see this as I think this is very much authentic violence.
And
It's not.
I must agree with you, Susan, because I take each of these events on a case by case scenario. And the way I looked at Paris was this was very definitely something real that happened. The security forces seem to have known about a lot of them beforehand. They know a lot of these people who are returning. And I just question why they don't round them up then. But we know that chaos suits the people in power. And just yesterday, we had the downing of a Russian jet on the Turkish border. Now, I was speaking to Gerald Salenti, and he basically views us walking or marching towards the first great war of this new century. And it sounds to me like you would agree with that, Susan.
I totally agree with that. I'm very concerned about it. I think that it will come into Europe. And I don't know if I mean Britain I mean, Britain is kind of like before, you're kind of, it's a little bit harder to get to you.
Well, here's
Though
the thing,
because of
because
the
right now
tunnel, maybe not.
we've got a Russian submarine that is probing our waters. They're looking at our Trident missiles, our Trident submarines, and yet we're having to outsource the search for this to people like France. It's outrageous. And yet here we are poking the bear in Ukraine and now taking it to the brink in Syria. They seem so determined, Susan.
Well, I mean, everyone's mad at Putin, and in Washington anyway, they're complaining that Putin's Russian fighters are invading Turkish airspace. But let's be real, Turkey has been Turkish airplanes have been invading Syrian airspace, doing reconnaissance flyovers, airdrops for terrorists for the past 2 or 3 years. And without Turkish support, ISIS would fall. ISIS could not get military weapons into the country if it was not coming through Syria. Excuse me, through Turkey. And so this is just, Erdogan has should be condemned vigorously and should possibly be brought up on war crimes for supporting ISIS. They should be judged and damned for it, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And I think Erdogan and Turkey went into panic mode when Vladimir Putin hinted at the fact that he knew exactly who was funding this crew in Syria. And of course, they've spread globally now. And of course, the minute Russia start taking out the oil trucks, well, that definitely meant revenge from Turkey, didn't it?
Well, it certainly did, because Turkey's acting again as the oil money launderer for ISIS. But I have to say that I sympathize. I agree with Putin. Putin has now sent surface to air missiles into Syria. They're in the process of just delivering them. I don't know if they're all there yet, but they're going to have surface to air battery missiles that can fire down Turkish airplanes if they cross into Syrian space. This is a very bold step, and it's NATO. But how could NATO support ISIS? I mean, this is the problem with the whole scenario, is that Turkey is definitely in the wrong, and Russia is definitely, not that I'm in favor of war at any time, but I'm much more sympathetic to. I think that a lot of the people at the CIA in Washington, not a lot, but a fair number, really think that we're on the wrong side of this thing. I think there's
Absolutely.
recognition that America's got on the wrong side of this whole issue.
And I was going to actually pull on your knowledge and your insiders in Washington, because what is going on with this administration, Susan? We all like a laugh and a joke about the Obama Nokia. There's even people saying he might actually be clinically insane. What's your take on that clown? And then more importantly, what's your take on the ones that are lining up to take his office?
Oh God, I think that Obama will look like a really good president when we see the next guys.
I think you might be right. Who do you
I'm
think's going to get it?
serious. No, no, no. Listen, listen. If you compare Obama, who is, I oppose his policy in Libya, but I'm so grateful that he's not putting boots on the ground in Syria. It's like he did learn. See, here's the irony. Libya and Syria were Hillary Clinton's wars. Now, Hillary Clinton is not the president, but she was acting like the president. She was the Secretary of State. She pushed into this area and dared Obama not to follow her. Well, Obama refused to follow her. That's the only reason we're not in Syria already. Okay? So it was Hillary who started it, Hillary who provoked it. And now the whole world is paying for this. Ironically, if the Democrats win the presidential election in 2016, it will be the woman who started the mess in the first place who will now, who will try to shift the blame onto Obama, her predecessor, and say, well, I'm not the one who did it. He did it. But it's really her. And she may be the next president.
There's a lot of people right now taking a look at Donald Trump. But for me, he's just one of the club, is he not?
Oh, he's a clown.
Absolutely.
He's scary. I mean, like he talks about 9/11, and I grimace because all of us would, so many of us, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people would like 9/11 to be treated seriously. And then he makes these wild statements. Oh, thousands and thousands of people in New Jersey were cheering the collapse of the World Trade Center. That is not true. That is absolutely not true. Even if you were to say that the dancing Israelis were just a dozen people, he may have seen the dancing Israelis on television or something like that, or heard about them, but he takes it to such an extreme level that the whole 9/11 movement loses credibility, even though he's bringing attention to it.
I just see one of Hillary's friends. He's one of the gang. He's just no different than any of the rest of them. Now, while all this is going on, Susan,
he's pompous and arrogant, and
he sounds really cut out for the job. Well, all this madness is unfolding.
But Ben Carson has a shot.
Do you think so?
On the Republicans. Well, the question is not whether they're going to win the presidential campaign yet. I don't think we can know yet whether which party's going to win, but I think that that Ben Carson and Donald Trump both have a shot at the Republican nomination, and Mark Rubio.
Yeah, Rubio. There's something about him for me. I don't know what it is. There just seems to be something about that guy.
Oh, he's bad news. All of them are bad news, but he is the only one in the establishment. Jeb Bush is dead in the water. Carly Fiorina dead in the water. They're not going anywhere. So the three to watch would be, and Cruz. I don't see him winning either. But I think that ironically, the two anti-establishment candidates, Ben Carson, who's the brain surgeon, and Donald Trump, and Marco Rubio.
It's scary to think that any of these cats could ever be in charge of the nuclear football. And yet here we are a couple of weeks ago, we seen 2 missile tests off the Californian coast, Susan. And with everything that's going on in the Middle East and beyond, that really...
I think that was actually a message. I know that was billed as a test, but I don't see that as a test. I think that was a warning to China and Russia to keep their submarines off the coast of our country. We don't want them here.
This is the easiest interview in the world, and Johnny Whistles, I'll bring you in here. Because, Susan knows exactly what I'm about to ask her. Because a lot of people did play that off as even a UFO. But we had Nano Girl on here talking about it. And she mentioned the fact that it was probably a message. And that really did resonate with us. But Johnny, you brought Susan onto the show. I'm sure you're full of questions for her.
Ah, Susan, no wonder you get to jail. My
That's
God.
fine. I get into so much trouble. I'm just a troublemaker. having a
Oh,
great time. But you guys, the thing is this: here's the bad thing. Okay, the good and the bad and the ugly is that America is really sick and tired and fed up with the establishment politicians. And so you see Donald Trump and Ben Carson coming on the strong in the Republican side. You see Bernie Sanders coming on strong on the Democrat side. And then of course Hillary. Hillary's ubiquitous. But really what it's saying is that our troublemaking is getting through. We're breaking the sound barrier. Okay, we're breaking the silence barrier. Let's put it that way. The corporate media has shut us out and silenced us and tried to remove us from the dialogue, and they have absolutely failed. The people have. It's like a rebellion here, which is very healthy. Even though the politics of discontent is unfortunately is being taken up by Donald Trump, but at least people are involved. They're fighting back. It's a feisty, rowdy election. And that's what Donald Trump is responding to, is just the passion and the we're sick of this. We're not going to take this anymore. The game is up. The politicians are going home. And that's a good thing in 2016. I want to tell everybody it's going to get very scary. I think there's going to be I think that Putin his intelligence is brilliant. I mean, Russian intelligence is dead on the mark, brilliant accuracy. I think that he moved into Syria because he knew that Angela Merkel was inviting the refugees. This all happens right when Angela Merkel announced that she's going to invite the refugees into Germany. And all of a sudden, Russia's in a fast motion at lightning speed to get Russian forces into Syria. And I think that it was an immediate play to stop Angela Merkel from using the refugee crisis to bring NATO into the war to throw out Assad.
And it's brilliant you mention Angela Merkel, because just today, the French president, Hollande, he's actually called on Germany to get their finger out and to get doing more in this war against ISIS. And Angela Merkel, she has turned around and said, yep, we'll take a look and we will certainly up the game. But here's the thing, Susan, we've got all these armies now, these superpowers gathering within Syria. There's not going to be any ISIS left to fight when they all get there.
Well, I've heard it said, and I agree, that Syria is a graveyard for NATO. I don't think that NATO. I think that Russia has stopped NATO from going into Syria. I think it's actually a very good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think that they cannot take on Russia. They can go in and they can strike. He's boxed them into a corner where they can only go after the ISIS fighters. But he is surrounded. But President Assad's forces are protected and surrounded by the Russian soldiers. They're embedded together, so they cannot go after the Assad forces. They're restricted to wherever Russia's taking Russia's taking action. And I think that that's very good, because I think this could end up being World War III very easily.
Susan, did you hear anything coming out of the White House that we didn't hear about, when Russia basically in a week did what the US couldn't do in 13 months, and that was to knock ISIS back the way? What were they saying in the White House? Because that must have been a hell of a. I would have loved to have been a fly in the wall.
Mad. They were really mad. They're like, oh, "What is Russia doing? Russia is attacking the moderate rebels who we count on. We are depending on the moderates to throw out President Assad. And if Russia doesn't stop doing this, they won't be able to succeed." And Russia kept pounding them. And this whole thing about shooting down the jet, I think is actually very serious, I think that is very serious, and I think that Turkey is, we all know that. We all know that this is like a very dangerous situation. Turkey should never have done that.
Exactly. We had the Cuban
And
missile.
frankly, if Erdogan, I never pronounce his name correctly. If Russia now fires on a Turkish plane and shoots it down over Syria, that would be righteous. That would be entirely legitimate. And maybe that's the threat that is now necessary. Maybe that's going to be a positive outcome of all this. That now Russia will say, hey, don't even think of crossing into Syria's airspace. Consider it protected. We're here now. If you come in, you shot us down because you said that we came close to your airspace. You enter Syria's airspace, you're over. We'll shoot you down immediately. That's what I think is going to happen.
Well, Erdogan was quick to point out that when Syria actually shot down a Turkish plane, that he was complaining that because it went over into their airspace that there was no reason to shoot it down, but he's obviously given the order to go and do that himself.
Yeah. No. Yep. That's right. But this is an exciting time to be in politics, though. I mean, I guess I'm looking at 2016, and I realize that I'm seeing it from the standpoint of Washington, but it's going to be a great year, you guys. It's going to be a great year for radio between war and elections, and the popular uprising is so strong right now against the establishment that I really do think there's hope. I'm not as, I mean, this conversation is kind of veering to the pessimistic, and I don't think it's pessimistic altogether.
Exactly, Susan. We like to put a positive spin on everything. And for every bit of fear and darkness that's out there, there's the opposite of that. And we have to look for the positive side in it. So what's your way out of this, Susan?
Side is us.
Exactly.
We are. I mean, like I said, I mean, it's manifesting in the politics of discontent is manifesting as support for Donald Trump, which is kind of kooky. But I don't think people really are supporting him so much as they're saying, no, we don't support the other guys.
We've got a listener right now, like I was saying before. We've got Alexander now. He's out in the Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine, that was the site of a full revolution. And we had NATO first poking the Russian bear. What's your thoughts when you've seen all of that unfolding? Because I bet you were able to call that one as well.
Well, I'm excited about, or not excited. I think that I'm not excited about Ukraine. I don't mean to say that. I think that I'm really excited that Crimea pulled out of Ukraine and did it through fair, free elections. And when the people, that is exactly the way that these things should be handled, through the democratic process, voter referendum, where the people get to make the decision. And the people get to decide for themselves if that's what they want.
You're right, Susan.
Instead of going to a revolution, instead of having a violent overthrow, and I know Kharkiv and some of the other towns have now become very violent, but going back, they also tried to have a referendum, and that was the way they voted. They made a decision to leave. They voted to leave Ukraine, and it should have been respected like it was in Crimea.
And Crimea, I mean, the media, we could see exactly the kind of tricks they pulled, because they were accusing Putin and Russia of invading Crimea when literally all the troops done was step outside of their bases. They were already there. This was already Russian. And, we're talking about Russia most of the night here. And it seems to me that they are ready for this war. But, Susan, we're coming up for elections. We're almost out of time. What's your positive message for all our listeners out there?
We're making a difference. This is the most exciting time to be alive on our planet. we have a lot more power that we are not, if we don't give up our power to the politicians. We do not have to secede. We do not have to cede our authority and let other people make decisions on our behalf. But we have to do this through nonviolence.
Absolutely. And when is your show on again? And where can people find more of your brilliant work, Susan?
Truth Frequency Radio, the Covert Report, 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific Time, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, New York time.
Since you've got all of these kind of spooky-like friends and insiders in government, you know that you're welcome on here any night when you've got any breaking news that you want to share with us, Susan. Okay. You know that.
I love coming on your show, you guys.
It's always a blast. And before you go,
yeah,
well, we've been talking about the global ISIS threat stemming from everything that's taken place in the Middle East, something that Susan herself landed up in jail for warning about. And tonight I can tell you that New York's Port Authority is on lockdown due to a suspicious package. Now, guys, this kind of event will probably happen more and more over the coming days and weeks. And most of them probably will be nothing to see here. But at the same time, do be very, very aware.
I think that I think the United States is lining up for a terrorist attack.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Susan. Do be aware that to cement this actual threat that does exist, there are real bad guys getting spread around the world.
This is not false flag anymore.
Exactly.
This is the real thing. And anyway, love you guys.
Susan, we love you. And listen, Susan, folks, wherever you are, make it TFR.
In Iraq, and that the puppet would have to be overthrown because the natural Iraqi people, the indigenous Iraqi people, as opposed to the exiles and the neocons and the Zionists and all the French and the British and all the people outside who wanted to go after Iraq, that the real Iraqi people would consider it traitorous to help the United States, and any government that would be installed by the United States would have no legitimacy. It would have to be overthrown, and that would propel into a region-wide war that would take over Syria and Jordan and Turkey and, the whole region. It would swallow everything. And then the war would come into Europe, because people fleeing the war would come to Europe and they would carry the distress and the tension, and it would spill into Europe. And I didn't really talk about the refugees so much as the fact that the outcome would be a war in Europe, which I think this is going to be.
I mean,
I think we're now moving to a stage where we have gone from from having a long fallow period of just tension, deep, painful, miserable, and we got to use the word blowback. I'm sorry, I know everybody in Paris is really upset about the terrorism. I'm upset about the terrorism too. I do not regard it as a false flag. I think it's real. I think these are really angry, bitterly furious, disappointed, impotent people. And they are frustrated because they were castrated men. We humiliated them. We degraded them. The United States did. We emasculated, that's a better word than castrated. Sorry, guys. Sorry. They emasculated them. And this is barking in the background saying thank you too.
See? Now, I've got you on tonight because there's so much going on in the world. And I was telling the audience before the break that you got into a lot of bother back after 9/11 because you were warning.
Well, I got to tell you something. I got to tell everybody this because I did. I was the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act, and I'm going to share something on your radio show that I have not told other people. But at the time that I got into trouble, I had been insisting on catastrophic consequences of the Iraq War, and one of the things that I had been pushing very hard was that the war would explode into a second phase of war, a region. I'm not making this up after the fact. This is what I said in 2002, 2003. I said that there would have to be a second war to throw out the puppet government installed by the U.S.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. It is the second half already right here on the Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker. I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Mr. Johnny Whistles. Want to thank each and every one of you for continuing to tune in not only to this show, but all the shows right here on your favourite network, truthfrequencyradio.com. And it's amazing because we're going to be joined by a fellow host on the network, an anti-war activist, former CIA asset, author, amazingly brilliant human being, Susan Lindauer. Welcome back at long last to the Kev Baker Show.
Hey, I am so honored. I love the Kev Baker Show. You guys are so much fun. My show airs on Saturdays and Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, like New York time, and gosh, I guess the time zone in Europe would be about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, so, Susan, I'll let you into a little secret because in Glasgow, because I work the weekends, I'm in the office, and you are a bit of my guilty pleasure. At the weekend, you come on at lunchtime, and some of the guests that you're able to bring on, it's very much like we're able to call on Alex in Ukraine. You like to go to people on the ground. And I really appreciate hearing from these real people in these real situations. So I have to give your show a big shout out. And just yet another arrow in the weaponry of TFR, because there's so much to be learnt from you, Susan. Are you there? There you are.
I'm right here. My little dog is